That's the best audio we're going to get today, apparently. So, good times, good times. Thank you for letting me know. I was worried my microphone would die, and it looks like it is dead. I forgot to recharge it last night. Okay, so hopefully you can now hear the sound. And I will try to shrink this down a little so everything fits. There we go. Okay, welcome. You can hear me now, right? Just if you can throw a comment in there, if you can hear me on the stream, that'd be great. Awesome. No, nothing? All right. Need more screens. Okay. Namaste. Yep, great, perfect. Sound might not be great today. I'll try to stand in front of the laptop. We'll do what we can. All right, so last time we were talking about, and we're almost on our unit on race and ethnicity, so hopefully we will get through that today. Okay, so, where were we? Okay, I guess we finished off kind of talking about, some of the legacies of racism in terms of social structures. Okay, so race and ethnicity though isn't all bad, right? Sometimes people cling to ethnic group membership when they would potentially have the ability or a reason to re-identify themselves, to change their identification in a bunch of ways, because it actually turns out to be very useful to them in some ways. So, some of the things that can make ethnic group membership basically still useful, especially for some white Canadians, who have lived in the country for generations, is that it can bring a bunch of things, right? Economic advantages, political usefulness, and ability to provide emotional support. Now, this isn't only true necessarily of white Canadians, right? I think, principally we've thought of it in that way, but certainly some of these things actually do pertain to other communities as well, right? Some of the advantages of kind of group-based ethnic or racial kind of identification can bring all of these kind of useful aspects of life. Okay. So, I'm sorry. You spelled Canadians wrong. The third A should be an E, because it is not Canadiens, it's Canadien, right? The French-Canadian way. Could you post your student ID so I can retroactively fail you on all of your tests? That would be lovely, thank you. No, I'm kidding, of course. I joke. All right, so if you take a shot at me, I'll take a shot right back. So there definitely are economic advantages to a certain degree of racial and ethnic identification. Specifically, when we talk about some of the economic advantages, one of the things that we can think of broadly is the way that, especially in the past, but even today, certain groups form kind of enclaves where their businesses are anchored and where they ultimately may thrive. So think of something like, the stereotypical example would be something like Little Italy, right? So if you see some cities have, segments that are like Little Italy or Chinatown. I think Edmonton still has a Chinatown. It's downtown, the place I never tread because it's too far from my house, but I'm assuming it's still there. These kinds of enclaves, right, basically were created in the past because, they created an instant consumer base, right? If everybody from your ethnic group sort of gathered in an area that was identified with your ethnicity, you automatically knew that you had a customer base, right? People were going to shop at your stores, eat at your restaurants, and the like. Also, what tended to happen in a lot of these communities is they would form kind of community links, things like, hang on, let me grab my highlighter so I can highlight these. Okay, things like, customers, suppliers, right? You might all work together to get supplies like foods or products from, country of origin. Employees, especially employees that speak the same language as your customer base, especially if there's ongoing immigration from the place that you've kind of set up, right? sorry, not the place that you've set up, from the country of origin, if you've got ongoing immigration, having employees that speak that language that can serve those customers is useful. And the other one, right, is credit. One of the things that tended to happen, and this is true of most kind of Chinese businesses and Chinatowns, is that it was really hard for Chinese entrepreneurs for a long time to get credit from Canada's mainstream banks, because they just weren't, they weren't considered at the same social level as white entrepreneurs. And so what they actually did was they created their own credit networks within those communities so they could borrow money, set up lines of credit amongst themselves, and not have to rely on mainstream institutions. So you still have this, to some extent. Credit can come from community, it could be linked to the homeland, and you get the import of goods, typically goods that are sought after by a particular community into a particular, what's called an ethnic business enclave. Okay, so that's one. I'm gonna go back to the pen. Did I skip oh, I did skip. Did I skip this slide? I didn't think I had. I will go back to it in a second. I'm already on that. Thank you for letting me know. I'll go back to that in a sec. Oh, pardon me. It's Friday. My apologies. Rude. I'm boring myself to death. What's happened? No, kidding. There we go. If I drop dead, I bored myself to death. There we go. Okay, the political usefulness, right? So political usefulness. Ethnicity can be potentially a powerful political tool. So what does that mean? Especially if you can kind of get a coherent identity that holds together for relatively large numbers of people, you can continue to use that as a political tool, right? You can continue to use it to lobby for things. So, for example, right, in Canada, we have long had a large Ukrainian population. So, Ukrainians have long kind of pulled together to get a lot of benefits from the federal government, whether it's support for, cultural associations, buildings, kind of maintaining ties between Canada and Ukraine, right? All of these things have been done. Why? Because there are enough Ukrainian Canadians around that basically the government wants to get them, or whoever is running, right, the political parties wants to get Ukrainians as a voter base. Because especially in Western Canada, it's a large enough base of people with Ukrainian heritage that essentially, if you get them on your side, it can be the difference between winning an election and not winning an election, winning seats in certain ridings and not winning seats. And so, the power of an ethnic identity can potentially be useful for, generating political capital and getting things from the government, right? And so this has been typical of kind of white, European kind of Canadians whose families have lived in the country for many generations, but maybe still hold ties to other communities. They can get, the government to adopt certain policies, invite certain people to parliament, this sort of thing. Okay, and the last one is emotional support, right? So basically some ethnic groups, have experienced discrimination and prejudice, and being kind of together with other people who are like yourself, who are experiencing it, it means you can all support each other. And I think that one is pretty obvious. Okay, what did I miss here? Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I thought I talked about this. I ended off with split labor theory last time. Okay, so yeah, this is pretty obvious. So when we talk about, conflict theory and how conflict theory reads race, and we're going to look at a bunch more here in a sec for, say, critical race theory, but the people that have a hard, slow down. The people who've had the hardest time assimilating in Canada have been those who have been subject to expulsion, right, from their native lands. So think Indigenous people, conquest, again, Indigenous people, slavery, and split labor markets historically, right? So basically, these structural legacies have made it harder for, or social structural legacies have made assimilation harder in conflict theory terms. Okay. Wait, okay, I'm good. All right, so okay. So this is a weird one. People always have a little, well, not always, but sometimes this one, and especially this, strikes people as a little bit odd, right? So basically, if we think of kind of intolerance and tolerance on a spectrum, right? We could basically have kind of 6 points of 6 degrees of separation in terms of ethnic and racial relationships. Okay, so genocide. Obviously, genocide is total intolerance, right? Because you're so intolerant of a particular group or people that you have decided to kill them all. So think of the Rwandan genocide, think of the genocide of Jews during the Holocaust, right? So much intolerance that you're trying to kill them all. Or, the genocide of Bosnian Muslims by Serbs in, during the kind of breakup of the former Yugoslavia at the end of the 1990s, right? You're so intolerant of them that you want to kill them. Okay, slightly up from there, you don't want to kill them, you just want to make sure that they are not around. So you kick them off the land that they're on, you claim that land, and you basically get rid of them so that they are no longer there to cause you any kind of issues. And you don't have to deal with how intolerant of them you are. All right, slavery at number 3, right? You own them, so you tolerate their presence, but never give them anything close to equal rights, right? They serve you as a kind of underclass. So you tolerate them a little bit more than genocide or expulsion. You're not trying to kill them actively, maybe more passively trying to kill them, but you control them. And then segregation, this is the idea, like the US South up to the 1950s, after the Civil War and up to the 1950s, separate but equal, right? You live over there, we live over here, and let's not mix in any way. So again, it's more tolerant than slavery because you're allowing them to have their own lives. They don't have to serve you, but you also don't want to mix with them. Okay, and this one I think makes sense to everybody, and most people would probably think of this as the most tolerant. However, we'll talk about assimilation in a second. At number 5, pluralism, right? Everybody gets to keep their own ethnic and racial cultures. Everybody gets access to equal kind of basic social services at pluralism. And that's the US today. That's Canada. That's most of Western Europe. Okay, and the last one, assimilation, right? Now again, people sometimes are like, why is assimilation the most tolerant? Because basically at assimilation, you blend everybody into the same group. So it's like everybody is just like you, right? Everybody has the same values. They adhere to the same norms. And basically whatever made people very distinct kind of disappears into, and everything ends up, I don't want to say a bland mush, but everybody is kind of the same, right? And so there's nothing to be intolerant of. And you can think of this probably as like the US and Canada in the middle part of the 20th century, like around 1950, right? Everybody, like not everybody, but the majority was white, right? Most people had become sort of Canadian or American as their kind of central identity. Maybe they had some kind of ethnic and racial quirks, maybe slightly different religions, but mostly everybody was Christian, right? So everybody was essentially assimilated into a broad society where everybody sort of shared the same norms and values. And so it's extremely tolerant because there's nothing really, to be intolerant of. And I think, I can't remember which sci-fi show it was. I want to say it was The Expanse. It's set way in the future, right? And everybody on the show, all the characters are basically of kind of mixed race because like centuries in the future, with centuries of people mixing between racial and ethnic groups, everybody will, like racial characteristics should be kind of equally distributed. And everybody's pretty tolerant of each other because everybody, like there's no kind of racial groups. Everybody's been mixing for centuries. So if you like sci-fi, that's the kind of example. Okay, hang on. Gotta go back to questions. No questions. Perfect. Okay. So, you might have heard this term kicking around because it was kind of, maybe it still is. I don't know. I don't pay that close of attention. Maybe I pay closer attention than I'm suggesting. Maybe last year or a couple of years ago, this was a sort of bugaboo, right? Your Ben Shapiro's, your Jordan Petersons, and everybody was all exercised about critical race theory. So it may be a term that you have heard in the past. I think now everybody on the right has shifted over to talking about DEI, and critical race theory has sort of been left on the, that's yesterday's outrage. Today's outrage is something a little bit different. Okay, critical race theory, though, is a very Marxian kind of conflict theory way of thinking about race. And basically, so it comes out of specifically Harvard Law School, right? And a couple of professors at Harvard Law very famously, and you don't need to know this for the exam, but I'll tell you anyway. Daniel Bell is was one of the premier advocates of this, and you see it reflected in kind of more contemporary scholars like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi. But basically, critical race theory, it kind of puts race into that same category that a lot of conflict theory thinking goes into, in terms of like your subordinate, your superordinate, and your subordinate class, right? Super and subordinate. Here you have white people, and here you would have kind of BIPOC. Let's say BIPOC is probably the right term here. Black, indigenous, and people of color. So that society is sort of set up, for the benefit of white people, and black, indigenous, and people of color are subordinate in some way, right? So it has that oppressor-oppressed kind of dynamic that you see in a lot of conflict theories. So, and yeah, what does critical race theory ultimately say? Basically that, racism is often the outcome of common practices that are embedded in kind of the legal, not just Canada's, the political, legal, and other institutions, but many people, especially those in dominant positions, are not aware of it. I guess at its very kind of, very simplest in some ways, what you can say about critical race theory is it says that any differences that appear along ethnic and racial lines. So let's say in a society, white people are doing a little bit better, right? White people are thriving, and black people, indigenous people, other people of color are not doing as well, that this is in some way a reflection of some kind of systemic racism, right? There's some kind of racism built into the system that makes some people thrive and some people not. And this is like any disparity, right? So if the people going into Harvard Law School are 80% white, that must be because there's some kind of bias in the system that allows more people in. Whether this is in education, right? They have higher SAT scores because they have more supports, they have better schools, right? That fundamentally means that more of them are going to get into the best schools like the Ivies, more of them are going to do really well in life, and it's going to perpetuate the cycle, right? People from subordinate communities are going to do less well because they have less advantages, and that's actually going to perpetuate their lack of advantage over time, right? So if there are more men, let's stick to race because I was going to go with men and then we're into feminist theory and that's something different. Okay, but let's say you have more white people in STEM fields, in tech, right? That would be fundamentally a reflection of something else going on that's advantaging white people, disadvantaging. So in very kind of extreme cases, like someone like Kendi, you would get phrases like, or kind of ideas like the only way to deal with past racism or past discrimination is with present and future discrimination. So if we discriminated against this group in the past, we have to discriminate against this group in the present and future, right? So that the past here, present and future here, so that these people here can move up, right? They can move up and take, at least some of them take their place, in the superordinate position in society. Okay. Interesting question. Yes. Okay. Doesn't assimilation mean their own culture disappears, similar to Americanization? I think, yeah. So sometimes we have this idea, and I think coming from Canada, that say Canada is a mosaic, America is a melting pot, right, where everybody's culture sort of disappears. Broadly speaking, that isn't really the case in the U.S. The U.S. remains an incredibly diverse and pluralistic society where lots of people hold on to their religion, their cultures of origin, their cuisines of origin. I think America really fits much better today in pluralism, right? Even though you might have this ideology that we want people's culture to disappear, that isn't really the case in the U.S. Again, other people may read it a little bit differently than I do, and I could be wrong about this, but I think the U.S. today, really sits here in pluralism. I think assimilation in the past, right, and maybe where the dominant metaphor for America comes from, is from its past, right? And people think that America is still more doing this. That definitely was what America wanted in the past, right? It wanted to send everybody to public school so everybody became a good American and adopted especially white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of values. But I think that's much less the case than it is today. And there's a lot more tolerance of say, different people holding on to their religious, cultural, and ethnic heritages and racial heritages than there was in the past. But it's a good question. One of my office hours, oh, I'm sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. Okay, with the caveat that things might change, because I've had some stuff pop up, which I don't want to talk about yet, but I will talk about if it becomes relevant to this class later. Good stuff, but stuff nonetheless. Tuesday from 9 a.m. till about, sorry, not 9 a.m., 9:30 till about 3, I will be in the office and you can come by and take a look at your exam. My only other kind of pocket of time is Friday afternoons. I can't do it today because I got a bunch of meetings, but next Tuesday, starting at 9, going till about 3, you don't need an appointment. You can just stop by. So yes, there we go. Okay, sorry. That was obviously a poll from last year, and I forgot to take it out because obviously this happened right before reading week last year. Okay, hang on. We're going to start families probably because we got lots of extra time. Okay, did I go back? All right, where am I? The future of race and ethnicity in Canada. Okay, so one of the things that say, let's give an example. Let's forget this title. I'm going to forget that title. We're still talking about critical race theory, right? So we're talking about critical race theory, and this is an example of how critical race theory conceives of a phenomenon like education, right? So basically, when we think of education, right, we tend to think of it as a merit-based system, a meritocracy, right? Where basically, if you have the highest grades, right, so you are an A+ student, you are going to get into the best university, the best programs, the best, then the best graduate program, or you're going to get the best job, the best, let's say you're an engineer, you're going to get the best internship, and it's all based on how well you do, right? It's based on your personal merit. So, what critical race theorists will say is that this is really nice in principle, but under this idea of merit, and depending on who's talking about it and when, there might be very much kind of an idea of, say, whiteness. This is a term that you might hear a lot right now, whiteness, right? That merit fundamentally is related to an idea of whiteness or white, you might hear like white supremacy, white dominance, these sorts of terms. So how does that make sense, right? What is it about merit that would be related to this idea of whiteness or white supremacy? So what critical race theorists will often say is that, well, the idea of merit sounds really lovely, from a base perspective. Ultimately, it serves one group more than another, right? And specifically, the idea of merit serves white people more than it serves people from some other communities. So, yeah, lots of students from disadvantaged backgrounds, right? So our BIPOC here, typically, is what they'd be kind of concerned about, can't compete with other students on equal footing, right? Because here, if you're, I have a really great graphic that I use in a different class, which I don't have access to. But if you're, say, someone who is middle class, there can be class elements, and white, there's a bunch of things that are more likely. You're more likely to come from an intact family, right? So parents are married, which gives you more resources in general. You're more likely to be a little bit wealthier. Your parents are more likely to be able to afford things like tutors and extra help if you're struggling. Or I heard this just a couple of weeks ago. It was absolutely wild. It just boggled the mind. So you all know the Ivy League schools, right? You all know your Harvards, your Yales, your Princetons, Brown, University of Pennsylvania. I'm missing one. I can't remember. It doesn't matter, right? These are the elite schools in the U.S., right, where the elites go. And it used to be that one of the ways that if you were rich and you had gone to one of these schools that you could make sure your kids went there and got the same advantage of having a degree from Harvard was essentially to bribe the school with a lot of money, like make donations. But it's gotten really expensive. Now they're saying for a legacy admission, the price tag is about $2 million, right? So you have to make about a $2 million donation to Harvard to get your kid into Harvard if you went there. So what people have done, and this is primarily kind of white people on the East Coast of the US, is they have started paying what are called, they're called education consultants for their children, starting in the 9th grade, to basically tailor their kids' CVs so that when they go to apply for Harvard, they have the best chance of getting in there. Now, this comes at a price tag of somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 a year to have little Timmy in the 9th grade have an education consultant that's going to be like, okay, little Timmy, I don't give a if you want to play basketball, because frankly, there's a better chance that you're going to get into Yale if you play lacrosse. So you pick up that lacrosse stick, net, what is it? Stick net. I don't know what the implement they use for lacrosse is. I've wandered into a terrible example. The only time I ever played lacrosse was in high school, and I got beamed with the stick neck and lost consciousness and got a concussion. So I'm traumatized by lacrosse. All right, but the point being, can someone tell me what the stick net is? No? Okay. I'm going to call it a stick. This kind of number, right, and I know, I'm sorry my slides are messy when I start coloring on it, is going to exclude any people from here, from, say, getting into Harvard or Yale, because they don't have $50,000 consultants to spend that are going to tailor their kids' CVs, or the extra tutoring, or all of that stuff. So, are the people getting into Harvard, or Yale, sorry, how do you know, or how can you tell if someone went to Harvard? You don't need to, they'll tell you, right? That's the joke, right? They went to Harvard. I don't know why it sounds like that, but it does. But I'm not bitter, you know. So, who gets into Harvard? It's the people. It's not the people with the most merit, according to critical race theory. It's those with the most advantage to buy merit. Right, that the merit ends up being a tutor, someone who tailors your CV so it's exactly what the recruiter is looking for, right? In firms that are making millions and millions of dollars a year. So, for CRT, while this principle of merit sounds really, really nice, right? It sounds great. It comes with a whole bunch of problems at the same time. And very specifically, the biggest problem with merit is it sounds fair. It's like, yeah, the person who gets the best grades gets into the best school or gets the best job or all of these things. But because, you know, racism exists in society, these communities here have already been disadvantaged and they don't have the ability to sort of keep up with those who are, you know, over here. They're never going to be advantaged in the same way. So it perpetuates the privilege of one particular class. And if we're talking critical race theorists, right, they're really focused on white people, right, especially old money white people, but white people in general. You okay? Okay, good. All right, so basically, critical race theory proposes a bunch of things, and it depends on the radicality of the critical race theorist, because you go from, like, I think pretty middle of the road, like, let's spend more money on pre-K for people that are, you know, disadvantaged and get them tutoring and all of this stuff and try to fund their public schools better and all of that, to all the way to, you know, we should actively say, you know, there's a quota on how many white people can be let into particular colleges, right? You have a whole range of kind of new programs that would improve or equal out that distribution of who gets to go to elite institutions, who gets advantages that have been meted out based on supposed merit, but now we need to address inequalities, right? And yeah, I mean, efforts to address ongoing inequalities have to begin by listening to what minority group members have to say about their experience of injustice and inequality. Okay. And I mean, this is something that I think often gets people's backs up a little bit when they talk about CRT, is that, you know, some of the things that we've proposed as like solutions to racism, things like colorblindness, right? This is the kind of Martin Luther King Jr., you know, I want my children to be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character, right? That everybody should be treated equally regardless of race, that this ignores kind of inequalities that are baked into the system. That might mean that, you know, people from disadvantaged communities, you know, aren't ultimately able to gain those advantages ever, that it always stays with the advantaged communities. Things like, you know, in favor of merit, we should have equity, right? So not everybody getting things equally, but everybody getting what they need, right? And then opportunity should be given out unequally to equal out things that have happened in the past. Okay, and I mean, there's lots of arguments against CRT as well. I mean, specifically, one of the things that CRT has struggled with is the fact that, say, in a lot of elite institutions in the US, some of them have come to be dominated by Asian students, right? So Asians, technically, a minority, they fit in that BIPOC label, but again, they reproduce some of the things that say, have been true of the white middle class for a long time. So intact families, a rabid focus on education, often sacrificing personal comfort for, to pay for extra education for their kids or tutors, all of these sorts of things, which has meant they've, risen up in terms of grades, SAT scores, and they've started to dominate some of the elite institutions. So you've had, certain terms or, critical race theorists suggest that, in a lot of cases, Asians are what are called I can't write on there, a model minority. That basically they are getting what they want essentially by sort of taking on aspects of whiteness, right? They're acting white in a sense. So you get this from critical race theorists as well. What university did I go to? Well, I didn't go to Harvard, I'll tell you that. So I did my undergrad here. I did my master's degree at University of Calgary, that elite and wonderful school, which is both depressing to be at and is actually in a physical depression in the ground. My least favorite, I don't know, if you're from Calgary and you love the U of C, I'm really sorry. I hated my time there. Mostly because literally the campus is in a valley and it feels inescapable and there's nothing around it, right? So literally you were getting on the train to go to Kensington to get a decent meal, or you were eating at the Tim Hortons on campus and wishing you were dead. Didn't have the greatest experience at U of C. Great friends, still have lots of friends there, but I did not like the campus, and then I did my PhD here. So definitely not at Harvard. Or Yale. Or that lesser school, Princeton. They're all great schools, and honestly, the scholars there would kick my ass. But, both physically and academically. So, no disrespect to those places. They're wonderful schools and they have wonderful scholars, but you know what? It's all good. All right, that was a poll from last year where people wanted to start Reading Week, but we've already done Reading Week, so it doesn't count. All right, so I'm going to go to our next thing, which is families. And I will delete this slide so it doesn't appear next time I do this. Okay. Actually, that was in the fall. It was in the fall because fall Reading Week falls way later, and too late, in fact. Oh no, that's the wrong course. All right, let's talk families. Still using my slides from winter here. Families, families, families. Okay, families. Alrighty. Let's replace that. That should still work. Okay, let's go. I'm going to check the. So I have to check the live stream. That looks right. Okay. Nope, wrong. Alt tab like your life depends on. Okay. Okay, this is obviously a comment from last year because I didn't clear the slides because I was going to do that today. Dinks are so smart for real is a reference to when we talk about dual income, no kids. We'll talk about that towards the end of this. Okay. So, families, right? So family, when we talk about family, and we're going to run through our perspectives as well. Shockingly enough, functionalists, our friends the functionalists, are rather warm to the idea of family. And why are they rather warm to the idea of family? Because basically, for functionalists, family is at the core of society, right? It is the key institution around which all of society ends up being structured. Okay, so the type of family that we have today, right, what we think of as kind of normative in the West, is what's generally referred to as the nuclear family. So this is distinct from, say, broader forms of family like clan, tribe, or extended family. The nuclear family generally is taken to mean, two parents with biologically related children. Oh, I was going to say two biologically related parents, but that's That's the British royal family. That's something different. Sorry, that's a tasteless joke. A true one, but a tasteless one nonetheless. Right? So, two parents with biologically related children, right? The children related to both of them. And this has become the norm, right? This becomes the norm, arguably with the Industrial Revolution and the mass urbanization that happens after the Industrial Revolution. People move off kind of feudal estates where they've been farming for centuries, often in close proximity to their parents, sisters, brothers, and all that jazz, and into cities and move into small apartments that they occupy, with their family. Okay, the nuclear family tends to be based on marriage, although that's increasingly less true as we move from the 1950s forward. But marriage is a particular type of social relationship that functionalists see as very useful. So what does it do? So for one, let me highlight here. We're going to go with the highlighter. It's socially approved, right? So that's super important. It's socially approved. If you tell someone you're getting married, presumably, unless it's to your cousin or your sister or you're too young, people are going to be like, that's great, right? It's good for people to get married is the general kind of social thinking. Presumably long-term, though increasingly that's less the case. And it's a sexual and economic union, right? So basically, the two people come together. Presumably, they do so in order to at least sometimes have sex, and to join their economic power together to support any kind of children that come out of it. Now, historically, right, this has been between a man and a woman. Obviously, that's changed in Canada and a lot of the West, really starting in the 21st century. Now we see more same-sex couples that might fit into this definition of the nuclear family. And yeah, generally, at least in functionalist terms, it tends to involve, I'll highlight this in different color, reciprocal rights. So both parties have rights and obligations between the spouses, right, and between parents and children, right? So within the nuclear family, spouses have a responsibility to each other, right, amongst others, to support each other, to be faithful, to care for each other. And then parents have obligations to the children that emerge from any kind of union, right, to take care of them. So there you go. All right, other forms of family. So obviously, right, I had here clan, tribe, extended family. Those are other possibilities. We also have, other forms of family that expand things either horizontally or vertically, right? So horizontally, let me get my pen back. This is Big Love, right? Maybe you don't know that show, right? So you would have, so horizontally, you would have typically a man, right? I'm enjoying drawing on my slides. I don't know why. And then you would expand the family horizontally by having, multiple marriage partners, right? So you would have, woman one, woman two. It's a terrible, I'm trying to make the woman sign and I'm doing a bad job. I'm really sorry. Woman three. And then, kids coming from each of these women, right? So you're expanding the idea of the family by adding spouses. Okay, so that's what's called polygamy, right? Now, so that's one man typically with multiple women, polygamy, right? So again, it's expanded horizontally. Now, the opposite is possible, at least theoretically, which is called polyandry. And here you would have, the same thing, except it's one woman with multiple male partners, husbands, or whatever it happens to be. Now, polygamy is not terribly rare in human societies. We see polygamy kind of historically all over the place. We still see it in quite a few societies today. Polyandry, on the other hand, is an extremely rare social form. I don't know of a lot of societies that are polyandrous, right? Polygamous, lots. And historically, lots of societies have been polygamous. And if you go off to bountiful BC, there's still fundamentalist Mormons out there somewhere who are polygamous as well in Canada today. But polyandry, one woman and multiple men is relatively rare. We don't see a lot of it historically. That said, if it does exist, it is a form of horizontal expansion of the family, right? Multiple spouses and then multiple kind of sub-family units with lots of kids. Again, this is contemporary examples in places like Canada and the US. Typically now we're talking about fundamentalist Mormons, where the idea of like sister wives and all of that jazz. Now I will erase my shameful depiction because, I don't know, it was really bad. I tried, but it didn't work. Okay, so I love this pen, as you can probably tell. I'm going to get USRI or Spot comments that are like, hate the pen, put it away. All right, so extended families expand them vertically, right, by adding older generations. So here you would have, grandma and grandpa, and then the parents, and then the kids, and maybe eventually you have grandkids, right? All living together in the same family unit, right? So, like I said, with the coming of industrialization in the West, this family form became rarer and rarer, right? You tended to have more nuclear families than extended families. We've seen something of a reemergence of it with particular immigrant groups to Canada that have kind of brought this extended family form where lots of generations live together back to Canada in a major way, right? So some people from, say, the Indian subcontinent, and a lot of times this is done even for practical reasons, right? I know I've had a few friends, who came over to Canada and brought their parents, and the parents cared for their children while they were away at work, right? And that this is not an altogether uncommon. So everybody came over, right, or they came and then they brought their parents over once they had kids, basically to do a lot of the childcare, right? So this is what an extended family kind of arrangement looks like. Okay, do I have time for this? All right, maybe let's leave this and we'll come back on Monday. We'll talk about all these sorts of issues with family on Monday. It'll be great. We'll talk about the decline of the nuclear family and all of that stuff on Monday. Have a great weekend. We will see you then. Okay. Good day.